Shana Tova. I started telling people that I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 17. I loved Judaism. My family was super into Judaism. I had some great rabbi role models growing up. Rabbis seemed like a good gig, even though I had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Mostly, it was a good answer to the questions that everyone was asking when I was 17. Where do you want to go to school? What do you want to study? And the scariest of all, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say rabbi, and if they weren't Jewish, they would smile and say, that's nice, and look at me like I had 3 arms. And if I said rabbi to a Jewish person, they would immediately apologize to me for not keeping kosher. Mind you, I didn't keep kosher then either. Then when I got to college, I didn't really move on the whole rabbi thing. I studied classics, Greek, and politics, and I prepared for the life of a professor. I would still trot out the, I'm thinking of being a professor or a rabbi whenever the dreaded question was asked, but I was leaning hard towards academia. Then one day, I got a phone call from the Hillel rabbi asking me if I wanted to have lunch with him. And this was strange because I had no idea who he was. Don't tell my mother, sorry, Mom, but I didn't really go to Hillel much in my first few years at school. So we went to lunch, and as we were talking, he asked me the question, what do you want to be? And without realizing to whom I was speaking, I said, I'm thinking of being a rabbi. And he paused for a moment, and the first question he asked wasn't, why don't I ever see you at services? It wasn't, do you keep kosher? It wasn't, do you pray? It was, how's your learning? Now, I love to learn. I love learning from anybody, anything. Old things, new things, random things. I'm big into podcasts. I love learning. So I talked to him about whatever I was learning that semester. I think it was Homer and Hobbes and neuroscience, and I got really excited, and he said, no, Ethan, how's your learning? And after I stared at him blankly, he said, well, do you ever learn the Mishnah? And I said, well, what's that? And then he said, how about the Talmud? And I said, And he said, do you read the Torah? And I said, yeah, the Torah. I read that on my bar mitzvah. So he looked at me for a minute, and then he said, okay, done. I'll make you a rabbi if you agree to meet with me and learn. So my curiosity was piqued. I couldn't say no to learning. I met with him the next week, and we learned a Mishnah together. And then the week after that, and the week after that, and the week after that, and so on. My eyes became open to what he meant when he said learning. Around that same time, I was introduced to the writings of a man whose story would also shape my views on Jewish learning. Franz Rosenzweig lived in Berlin around the turn of the last century. A Jew, a doctor, a PhD, he also loved learning. He was a seeker after deep wisdom to instruct him on how to live a good life. He found Judaism not so meaningful, and pure philosophy unable to satisfy his spiritual needs, so he had arranged to convert to Christianity. He told his mother of this plan the day after Rosh Hashanah, waving a Bible at her, saying, Mother, here is everything. Here is truth. She promptly had him banned from their home synagogue. Then, 10 days later, after attending Yom Kippur services at a different synagogue, he wrote to his friends that he was calling off the baptism. That conversion no longer seems necessary to me, he wrote, and no longer seems possible. Rosenzweig never wrote about that Yom Kippur service. We don't know what happened to convince him that Judaism had depth. I've always assumed that it was the rabbi's sermon, but no one knows for sure. We do, however, know why he wanted to leave. He wanted spiritual and intellectual depth, and until that Yom Kippur, he had not found it in Judaism. Later, he would write that the problem was one of schooling, that his Jewish education inadequately taught him what was worthwhile in our tradition. His problem, he felt, was not unique. He complained that most Jews of his world had only received their religious instruction from a few years of classes and maybe some high holiday sermons. the well-educated that had left Jewish wisdom behind in favor of outside knowledge. The mezuzah may still greet one at the door, he wrote, but the bookshelf has at best one Jewish corner. In this assessment, Rosenzweig put his finger on the problem confronting the Jews of his world, and perhaps ours as well. Because what I find so enticing about Rosenzweig's story is how familiar it is. He was educated, affluent, urban, engaged in the world around him. He could be anyone in the room today. What he and I both lacked was an appreciation for the profundity of content and meaning that Jewish learning offers. He thought another religion would have the answer. I thought I would find it in ancient Greece. What both of us found is what the sages have known for millennia, that Jewish learning can apply to every topic and every situation, that study feeds your soul, and that despite how old and poured over our tradition is, it is impossible to sit and learn a text without learning something new. Jewish learning is an inexhaustible source of meaning, motivation, and solace for anyone willing to spend the time to access it. Now, the phrase Jewish learning can mean many things. Studying the Torah, discussing ancient works, a lecture on history, or reading Jewish literature. Yes, there is content to know. The more background one acquires, the deeper one can delve. Hebrew language is the key to unlock the palace, but with so much translated, English can take you far into the courtyard. Yet while content is important, content is knowing, and knowing isn't learning. Learning is the act of opening your mind to what new things may lie in a world yet undiscovered. The act of sitting down with the Torah, the rabbis, the philosophers, the poets, the Zionists, the Chassids, the moderns, anyone engaged in the project of building off of our rich intellectual history. The act of learning alone with a friend or a teacher, this is all broadly encompassed by the term learning. The Jewish learning that Rosenzweig found on Yom Kippur, and I found with my rabbis and teachers, is invaluable in the life of an individual Jew and the vibrancy of any Jewish community. For the individual, learning has benefits both spiritual and practical. Spiritually, the process of learning can be devotional, itself a religious act, one that fulfills the mitzvah of Hagiti Yomam Balayla, to meditate on these words day and night. Learning can connect us to God. Past chancellor of the seminary, Louis Finkelstein, used to say, "When I pray, I talk to God. When I study Torah, God speaks to me." As we ponder, explicate, and refute Jewish texts, we are unlocking their holiness and applying it to teach us today. The rabbis say that even that which a student asks their teacher right now was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. That is to say that when we learn, especially with other people, we are tapping into and taking part in the revelation of the divine. Theological claims aside, learning makes us better people. Both the act of learning itself, which requires one to be humble and listen to others, but also the values latent in our texts and the process of weighing those values when they compete. The Torah says, "You shall not wrong the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." This is an important commandment, to be sure, but what is more important are the pages of debate from the rabbis that follow. How far does "do not wrong them" obligate me? Is the stranger more important than the resident poor? Who qualifies as a stranger, and what if they might be dangerous? These are questions that are relevant today, and by learning the debates of our forebears, we can bring new light to the world around us. Jewish learning doesn't stay simply within Judaism. Indeed, it can't. There has never been a more important time for Jewish learning to inform what we do in the rest of the world. We can all feel the turmoil brewing around us. There is a lot that has happened in the past year to cause anxiety. Will all of us here learning Mishnah save our planet, our downtrodden, or the soul of our country in itself? No. But participating in learning, debate, self-improvement, and communal engagement certainly will birth answers to the problems that we face. I know that yesterday you heard from Rabbi Cosgrove about the importance of action. For a Jew with problems in the world around them, inaction is a sin. And here I'm telling you about learning. What about the action? Well, this debate has happened before. 2,000 years ago, two rabbis were arguing about whether study or action were the more important Jewish value. In that instance, The elders decided that study, learning, was the greater of the two, but only because study leads to action. What is important here is that the Talmud says that I am right and Rabbi Cosgrove is wrong. But also important is that learning when done right pushes us to action, and action when done right should be built off of learning, because that is what Jews do. From Moses to Marx to Milton Friedman, we have a long tradition of building off of our culture of learning, putting our values into action, and trying to better the world around us. Unfortunately, it also seems that the task before us today is to defend the very idea of learning itself in a world that appears increasingly skeptical of intellectualism, where intellectual, educated, elite are used as slurs, and too often anti-Semitic ones. A Jew must stand up and say, no, learning and the intellect are to be cherished, not derided. In a society that more and more monetizes education in terms of a paycheck, with studies that show what the return on investment for certain degrees is, it is the job of the people who, at less than 0.2% of the global population, hold 22% of Nobel Prizes, to stand up for learning's sake. To learn not because it makes us money, but because it makes us who we are. We are and always have been the people of the book. In ancient times, sages and their disciples would discuss texts as they traveled from city to city. By the Middle Ages, we were organized into schools and academies. Eventually, Jewish learning was everywhere in the community. Rabbi Heschel recounts that in Poland 100 years ago, each profession had its own Beit Midrash, its own study library, where butchers and bakers and shoemakers would gather when they had a few minutes and they would learn Torah before returning back to work. In the old country, even schmoozing included Jewish learning. A greeting was new. Hey, tell me a little piece of Torah. Learning together allows us to connect on a deeper level than casual conversation ever could. Learning together creates community not just with the people in the room, but we join a community with every Jew that has studied that text before. We may not be marked by constant study of holy works, but all Jews are marked as learners. It's in our rituals, it's in our DNA. Synagogue is centered on the public reading of our book. Passover is essentially a well-catered study session on the Haggadah. When a young Jew comes of age, what task proves their readiness to become a member of our people? They aren't sent into the wilderness. They don't hunt or fight. They read the Torah and they teach it to their community. They do this because to be a full participant in the Jewish people means to lend your intellect and your voice to the project of Jewish learning. To be a learner is to draw strength and meaning from being a part of something larger than yourself. And so when we stop learning, when we engage in Judaism only through rituals or life cycles, we risk severing that connection and losing that strength. For Rosenzweig, in his day, the loss of Jewish learning wasn't simply a problem of Jews no longer being able to quote the Bible or know the difference between the Mishnah and the Talmud. It wasn't purely content. The problem, Rosenzweig wrote, was that learning, the old form of maintaining the relationship between life and book, has failed. Maintaining relationship between life and book. Few statements could be more Jewish. If we do not keep a relationship with the books of our people, then why continue to be Jews at all? And yet, if those books don't help us relate to life and the lives around us, then what good are they? The act of learning, of sifting through texts and ideas to fit and refit them to our world, is the job of every Jew. The failure for Rosenzweig to connect with Jewish learning almost cost modern Jewish thought one of its brightest lights. Jews in our day are similarly in danger of disengaging. After his mysterious moment on Yom Kippur, Rosenzweig did not simply remain a Jew. He dedicated himself to ensuring that future Jews would know the meaningful intellectual life that Judaism offers. He teamed up with Martin Buber and other luminaries of the day to create the Free House of Jewish Learning, the Lehrhaus. Now, when I say other luminaries of the day, imagine I told you that there was a basketball court somewhere where Kobe and Curry and James and Jordan were all playing pickup. That's what the Lehrhaus was like. But with scholarly Jews, not basketball players. Sorry, couldn't help myself. The Lair House was a place for anyone to learn. Regardless of ability or knowledge, people shared what they were working on, what they were curious about, angry about, anything that would ignite the spark of Jewish learning. The mission of the Lair House was to ensure that learning would be accessible and interesting to anyone, that Jewish learning would be seen as a meaningful path to a good life. And so too should we see Jewish learning as the path to a good life, and we must make our community one that comes together through learning, a place where everyone has a chance to find meaning in our tradition and apply it to the world today. To that end, we are starting a new program at the synagogue this fall. Don't worry, I checked with the chairman first. This program is called Study Circles at PAS, and everyone here is invited to create or join in a small group that will meet regularly to study Jewish text. Circles can consist of 2 people or 20. Some may create groups for friends, a way to connect deeply over more than just jobs, families, relationships, and daily life. Others will form around demographics. There will be a Torah circle for new moms, a study circle for grandparents, for families who send their kids to Jewish day camp, for people going on the upcoming Israel trip to meet and learn and prepare. We will put out monthly sources and discussion questions, or groups can select their own topics, and we will provide resources. You could create a book group on the new Jewish Lives series that we'll be reading this year. Whatever you and your circle want to learn, our tradition is open for you. We will, of course, continue the synagogue's mission of meeting people where they are. In Poland, there were study circles for professionals on a break. So we'll have groups in people's offices, their homes, bars. The new Eli M. Black Lifelong Learning Center can be our Lair House, full of Jewish learning and teaching one another day and night. If you, like the rabbis, want a teacher, we can work with you to provide a teacher for your circle. As long as you will commit to regularly meeting once a month, once a week, once a quarter, I can guarantee that you will find the experience worthwhile as individuals and as a community. Some people here have already been in some of the groups that we've started on a small scale. I've been creating groups like this for 5 years now, and I've heard all the reasons not to join. You might say to me, I don't know anyone, and that's okay. The website will have public groups to join or talk to me, and we'll make sure you find a group. The point of this is to make a large synagogue feel small and offer yet another portal of entry. Everyone here, is thinking, Rabbi, I'd love to, but I just don't have the time. Yes, you do. The Talmud says that when a Jew dies, one of the questions they are asked is, did you set aside regular times for study? Because that is how we show that something is important. We carve out time in our schedules, busy as they may be, to make it happen. It's like going to the gym for your brain and your soul. You just have to make the time, and the more you do, the easier it gets. If you're thinking there's so much going on in the world right now, how can I spend my free time learning? I should be doing. As we said, study must lead to action, but action off of study. At a time like this, we must all be learning our tradition, reaching for Torah, not Twitter, so that we can move our world towards justice and sustainability. I imagine that some people might avoid learning because of a feeling of not knowing enough or not wanting to admit ignorance. I would remind you that admitting our ignorance and imperfection is precisely what we're supposed to do at this time of year. Learning is the ultimate form of tshuva, of repentance. It entails admitting that I don't know something, that I am lacking. But learning also implies that I can change. Saying I want to learn is really saying that I can do better, must do better, and will do better in the year ahead. The Midrash reminds us that anyone who lowers themselves by admitting ignorance will come in the end to be elevated through learning. Finally, giving Jews the tools to learn, whether in a group or not, gives them the tools to always have a way of connecting. Surely the deep connections created by group learning lead to a more supportive community. But even on an individual level, learning can bring comfort. If you are away from the synagogue, if you're away from your study partner, if you're anywhere in the world, you can always pick up a Jewish text and instantly be connected to our history, our people, and our God. That connection, the link that any Jew has a right to feel at any time, can be a source of strength in a dark hour. Montefiore said that it is this intellectual element in Judaism which has allowed our people to endure all that we have over the millennia and continue to survive. That 20-year-old kid who started learning Mishnah with the Hillel rabbi never would have guessed that when he had a child, the first thing he would want to do is read Talmud with him. The night after our son was born, he was in the NICU. I told my wife that I would do the 2 a.m. feeding so she could sleep, and as I left our room, I grabbed a page of Talmud that I had printed for the occasion. The page discussed the obligations of fathers towards sons and sons towards fathers. I brought the Talmud to learn because I wanted my son to start his Jewish learning as soon as possible, and also because it made me feel better. In this time of change and uncertainty, it was nice to lean on that ancient document and be supported by all of the fathers and sons that had already studied it. After a while of sitting there with baby bottle and Talmud, I looked up and I noticed across the room a Muslim man sitting with his baby and reading to him from the Quran. He looked up and we both smiled. Learning can help propel us across barriers because we all take comfort in connecting to something larger than ourselves, and we are all searching for a life full of meaning. So whether you create a study circle this year or next year, we should all do a little more Jewish learning in the year ahead. Set a fixed time. Make it regular and include a friend. The task ahead of us is to revitalize Jewish learning, and in so doing, revitalize ourselves. Learning is the way that Jews connect to our past and inspire our future. Learning is how a Jew takes their place within their people, how a Jew makes their corner of the world a better place. Learning is there for each of us, waiting to bring us in and make us better. As Jews, this is our birthright. Everything else is merely commentary. Now go and study it. Shana Tova.